So it's really wonderful to be with you here today, Davood. Thank you very much for coming on and having this conversation with me.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
How are things in Macau right now?
Um, Although I officially live and work in Macau, but my wife has a place in Hong Kong.
Okay.
I am in the quarantine. We are both staying in Hong Kong.
Hmm. So,
To answer, that doesn't answer the question. That's just a distraction from the question. Things are okay. I think the response here started late January or early February. So this is now the end of our second month of quarantine, and the restriction, mobility, and mask wearing, and all that. So this, we have adjusted to the crisis state as our new normal.
Yeah, I'm here in New Mexico with my wife, and I think it's New Mexico, which is as readers might not, or listeners might not know, that it's a pretty small state in the United States. So it's not terribly populated. Therefore, it hasn't been the epicenter yet of the coronavirus, as has been true of Seattle, New Jersey, and especially New York City. So we haven't really experienced yet the worst of it. But our governor here has been pretty aggressive with regard to testing and social distancing, home quarantine, and trying to get another hospital established here in the event that we do have an upsurge. This is probably going to be the case. But so far, it's just, so to speak, all quiet on the Western Front. It's very quiet. It's like the quietness before a storm. My wife and I have been quarantined now since March 13th. So that's not nearly as long as you, but it's been about 17 days now. And as you nicely put it, we're kind of things are falling into order now. And pretty interestingly, before we started to hit record here, you and I were talking about how things have gone from being uncertain, and there's been kind of, at least for me, an attempt to try to make sense of things during a certain length of time. And now I do feel as if I understand enough. And as you beautifully put it before, there are certain questions that don't seem to need to be understood at this juncture. How has that been? How has that process been for you?
Yeah, especially taking away of the certainty about the future is like when I have like 5 pieces with which I can solve a puzzle, or I can work, I can live with 5 things, and if 2 of them are removed, then I'm left with 3 things, and those 3 things now occupy my awareness. So one of the pieces that is now removed by necessity, and I cannot, unless I want to get obsessed over it or fixated over it unproductively. It's about the future. When will the quarantine stop? When will things go back to the way they used to be? And so I find myself, and I think this is generalizable to other people too, that I find myself letting go of that view of the future, and just my access shrinks to here and now, and here and now expands. Then it is expanded, and I'm working more in the here and now, thinking less about a month from now.
How has that changed for you over the course of time? That is to say, before the quarantine, what was your thinking like, and now what is your thinking like?
This might be a little bit difficult to express, but I am among those people who, I say among those people because I have recently spoken to a few of them. People who don't feel really in sync with the rest of society. They feel a little bit out of sync. And by that, I mean, if society is going through a crisis, or if we are going through a crisis, then society is at peace. Or if we are going through a crisis, society might be going through a different crisis. So it's that our concern is, we feel like our concern is not shared, or Usually that means being out of sync means that being at a relatively at a disadvantage because people don't empathize with you if you're in that position. But now I feel strangely more in sync. I feel more similar to other people, and I'm in the past 2 months I've made more contacts with other people from my current location, my current position. More calls with family members, more calls with friends. People reach out more, ask about how I'm doing. I do the same. So I feel more like I'm connected to people. That's one thing. The other thing is that I find is the role of confidence. So how irrelevant confidence is when it comes to information and validity of judgment. So somebody, for example, just to pick an example, I don't want to pick on him too much, Donald Trump. In the beginning, he said that coronavirus is it's not serious. It's not like a flu. And then he switched recently to saying that we are at war with it. This is so serious and we will win. Anybody who doesn't take it seriously is seriously mistaken. There must have been a moment there where he flipped from one position to its opposite. And there must have been a moments in the middle where he was maybe hesitating, not sure, but I just can't imagine that. Maybe he had those in his private moments, but some people, and he's not the only person, the people who have that air of confidence that they just project their judgment on this situation. And people who are more hesitant, people who don't rush to judgment, they're also the same. They also apply the same kind of style to the COVID event. So I see how some things are changing, but some things are also not changing. What do you think about the being in sync and being out of sync? Because you also mentioned to me that in the past, you could say that in the past 7 years, you've been in quarantine. as if you're in quarantine.
Yeah. Well, my wife and I have been, my wife is an artist, and I have been joking a little bit that everyone is now living our life. I've been writing and thinking for some years about the importance of contemplation, what it means to contemplate, what it means to try to apprehend the lineaments of reality, how contemplation is of a piece with what I think meaning is about. And it's just striking that we've been living a fairly, what I would call, lay monastic life since around 2013. By lay monastic, I mean to a fair degree, we're following some aspects of a monastic schedule. We meditate at certain times. I chant at a certain point of the day. We recite certain things before we eat. We eat mindfully, and so forth. It's not it's not a Zen monastic schedule, but it has elements of it. And that we started very slowly around 2013 to the present. So it does feel as if the world's actually becoming in sync with us, and albeit in a fairly more forced way. Now, not everyone is taking this as an opportunity to contemplate. Surely not. Some people are doubling down on the way they work. Others are doubling down on forms of consumption. But I do think a fairly small number of people are beginning to experience the Pascalian quote, namely, all of man's problems stem from man's inability to sit in a room quietly by himself. That's what we basically have been, to a fair degree, learning how to do. How do you sit quietly and restfully by yourself? Or to put it differently, how do you find peace regardless of situation? I think a way of not being in sync would be to embrace the following proposal, which is one that many people embrace, which is one that a number of conversation partners with whom I philosophize have tried to embrace, to wit, happiness or whatever is contingent upon circumstances, contingent upon situations. and call that contingent happiness, or it's contingent upon my getting exactly what it is that I want, and I'm happy whenever it's the case that I don't get what it is that I want. Even if someone has a stoical predilection, it means a lot more to realize that true peace or inner peace is not dependent on the perturbations of circumstances. And that's an extraordinary, important, and very difficult lesson, I think.
So something like that, the critique of confidence that I just mentioned, a good version of that is possible when it comes to not depending on the outer circumstances, not anchoring one's happiness, not tying it to what happens outside.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a kind of sweet humility. If I may use the word humility in the sense of, and not some kind of self-lacerating sense, but rather in the sense of someone who is always open to the possibility that one's convictions, or what Buddhists would call views, could be incorrect or incomplete or somehow warped, or if you want to use a cognitive scientific point of view, biased in some way. When one begins to genuinely understand that's true, then one's disposition begins to be modified accordingly. But it's sweet. I realize that I don't have to know what I thought I did. I don't have to be an I mean, I need to sort out some things in order to cope with or navigate through the world, to be sure. But I actually don't need to over-index on confidence or certitude or conviction above all in ways that I thought I had to.
What I admire about your 7 or 8 year.
It's not in Tibet. It's just in a room.
Is that it seems like you two were both in peace with it. Because I myself, even during periods where I was semi-monastic in my behavior, in the way I conducted myself, I still felt the pressure that comes from the norms of society. Like, oh, you're missing out. There was always this nagging voice that said, oh, you're just doing this? What a loser. And
missing
now,
out. Yeah, missing out on what?
Missing out on this vague conception of there's always some other joy out there that must be chased. Of course, I'm identifying it as a kind of a false target, but it still exerted effect on me. Just because the sheer effect of common belief, when there's something that most people believe and act upon, it has some effect. I find that it affects me, whether or not I choose to. It takes really explicit commitment to get out of it, and I never really took that step that you did.
Well, I don't know if that's true or not. You didn't say, but this is where I think philosophy is the ultimate. It's the ultimate in terms of living in no man's land. The philosopher is someone who accepts living in exile. Plato puts it nicely when he talks about the difference between a kind of knowledge and doxa and common sense. And
right.
I mean, philosophy has always been paradoxically elitist, very egalitarian. I like to put it that way because I think that philosophy opens itself to anyone who walks through its gates. That's the egalitarian element, but it's very elitist in the sense that few people really do walk through those gates. But once one does, it just doesn't matter that much what's going on because the course is clear. I care about wisdom. I don't care about the common desires that or the things that are going on or what I'm missing out on Friday night in New York City.
Sure.
I can be clear. I have basically three aims in life, and by teloi I don't mean goals. I mean kind of instantiations for me what is most real. One is enlightenment. I think that's real. I think the Eastern view of enlightenment is real. I think people have been enlightened to varying degrees. They have realized their true nature, and I think they have lost a fair amount of the mental suffering or disease associated with their ordinary egoic ways of living. So now someone might say, wait a minute, I thought you were not living with so strong convictions. That's a postulate. I mean, I've seen people who seem to be on different wavelengths, and I have a postulate or a faith that it's so. And so the reason I'm sitting is not just to be calm on a Tuesday. The reason I'm sitting is it's an investigation of the nature of being a reality. I wouldn't sit 3 days if it were just about being kind of calm. It's not a secular pursuit whatsoever. It's just one particular psychotechnology for investigating the possible nature of reality. And then the second one is wisdom. I care about what it is to lead a wise life. I could say more about what that is. The third one is love. I care a lot about what it is to love all beings. And I think this is a time when we're actually seeing the emergence of people who are talking about care and concern and compassion. If they wanted a little more poetic way of putting it, would be I'm starting to learn how to love other beings.
Right.
And the reason I brought that up here is that these are the ones I'm most committed to. And in virtue of being committed to them, I'm not so easily drawn, or haven't so easily been drawn to the question of what I might be missing out on. I don't feel as I'm missing out on anything. These are the things, and they're not things.
But could you, is it possible for somebody, and is it imaginable for somebody to be on the path of understanding these three tili and have mixed feelings along the way, and have an ironic distance and like sense of, oh, somebody might make fun of me. And for some reason, since this is something that I had in me since I was a child, I always have this doubt, this sense of unsureness, even after commitments, even after I begin pursuing something in earnest. I always have the multiplicity of voices that occasionally come and contribute something to the.
What do you think?
Of course, my lived experience says yes, and of course I can then take that evidence and discount that I have crossed the gates of philosophy ever in my life. I can either say that hasn't truly happened in me, or I can say that it is possible to still have mixed feelings.
There's a third option, which is that it may or may not be true. The third option is the one that people don't often consider, and that is that there is what I call the heart, or there is a faculty, or heart mind, as some traditions call it, that's a unified form of knowing, and we just don't listen to it. And so, in virtue of not listening to it or not really knowing it well enough, we find that it seems what it says is then taken to be on par with all the other sensibilities or voices. So let's take an example. We were going on a meditation retreat. Actually, I was telling you about this over Twitter, and we weren't sure whether we were going to go on this retreat. This was held from February 28th to March 9th, I believe, in Southern California. So my wife and I were involved in deliberating in the very philosophical sense. I asked a lot of people. I asked some medical people I knew about what their take on the matter was. We tried to really ascertain what the right thing to do was. So before that time, it's just a very common case of vacillating, right? And as you hear from this person, you start to give that a bit more weight. As you hear from that person, you give that more weight. And what's more, the deliberative process is a meta process because you're not really quite sure that you know how to deliberate well, right? So during that period, it looks a lot like our standard account of our mind. It's just churning and moving sideways, and there are doubts and reservations and hesitations. But then we came to one of my approaches is to ask what I think is the question. So set aside all other questions, just sink down, be calm, presuppose that there is the question to ask here, and the question will supply the answer. It's a game. It's a way of understanding. And so you don't get a chance to ask 10 questions. You ask one. And so I think I just asked the question, what is it about this experience that's something like seminal or fundamental for a spiritual practice? Something like that. And it came to me that it was about the fear of death. And I thought, okay, we should go. That was, she had to come to her own deliberations. That wasn't quite my wife's question. Now, at that point, there's a kind of calm, a relief, that right, everything has finally come into a certain order. There is a certain resoluteness. But then you might imagine in this scenario that it didn't happen here, but then there could have been the arising of doubts. Well, wait a minute, was I really quite sure about that? What just happened there? But to my mind, or to my way of thinking here, that was a moment in which the heart was articulating what I call existential truth. Something was opened up and was very clear. And then the ordinary mind comes back, having gone offline for a moment, comes back online and returns to its machinations. It's very good at posing doubts. It has most of our minds have skeptical tints, or many of them do anyway. So it now comes back and says, well, wait a minute. I'm not so sure about this. So that's the third option, is that there actually is something in us. It's a unified form of knowing, as I like to call it. It's absolutely clear to us when we're in the presence of it. After the fact, though, our ordinary mind, or discriminating mind, as Zen calls it, comes back online, but we give that just as much weight as we gave to the unified form of knowing. As a result, we come into greater confusion. From a Zen point of view, what is also happening here, once we give that as much weight as the other thing, is that, or from a non-dual point of view, we might just find that we delight. We really delight and relish in obfuscations, ambiguities. As one of my teachers puts it, the separate self loves separateness. Oh, this is so interesting. Wow, I'm uncertain again. Oh, I don't know what the right thing to do is. I thought I knew, but maybe I don't know. I'm so confused. And then there's my girlfriend, and the person I'm seeing, and she has this kind of dramatic thing too. And I was just talking with someone last night, and this is very dramatic, very Italian, and this is very, very dramatic. But we usually think this is just misery, right? Oh, it's terrible. It's very miserable. But what if we turn around and say, oh, we actually, for some odd reason, we've gotten accustomed to actually delighting in all the, it's like we have our own psychological realist novel that's 1,000 pages long.
Right.
So that's an articulation of a third option.
Yeah, right. So let me see if I understood you correctly.
Yeah.
There's a serious place where doubt can come from, that hesitation, or swinging between the two possible answers. And one, that serious way is when something is in the heart, something is coming from the heart that is either not said yet or is not yet heard. That's when we should listen to it, or give it voice first, or ask the question, as you said. So in that case, it requires some deliberation. But the other source of it is just because it is possible for us to shift our perspective and see the same situation from different angles, different perspectives. Just by imagining those things, we might give them the kind of voice that then distracts us from that unified position. And that, as you said, we can just enjoy that. Just enjoy that imagined position but something that is imaginary doesn't have to become real. Is that fair to say? There are many imagined positions for us to think from, but they don't have to all be equally real for us.
Yes, exactly. That's what I think. I mean, I think we've had these moments. Let's try to come back to a very simple one. You have a moment. Okay, let's go back to the really endearing one. You have a moment which you think, I love her. I love her. And we know what it's like to experience that. That's a moment of, in the proper sense, complete certitude. Maybe we shouldn't even use that word. It's just utterly clear. I was tearing up when I say it. I love her, right? It's just, it is so.
Mm-hmm.
And everything is quiet. And we know it with a sense, it isn't simply like a Cartesian sense of knowing it because it's past the battery of doubts that we have. This is not, right, not some kind of rigorous Cartesian analysis that gives us some hard-won certitude. No, it's just very light, very easy. We know it.
And it doesn't even, it can be completely disentangled from that being informed sense of certitude. I can give one example, which might be somewhat amusing. There's a strange experience I've been having these days because my wife and I spend more time together at our place.
Yeah.
And, you're familiar with the deja vu experience. Deja vu is a well-known experience of this moment feels as if it has happened before, and it's not the first time that it's happening. I've been having this experience. I've had it, I think, 3 or 4 times so far. It is the complete opposite of deja vu. It is, I look at my wife and I feel like I'm seeing her for the first time, but I've never seen her before.
Right.
And that's, but I still feel that love. I still feel that certainty in the love, in the emotion, and in that sense of discovery. The discovery is about somebody new, completely new, somebody who is like mysterious, still mysterious, and maybe I will never get to know her completely, probably, but I'm certain about my stance towards her. So
I'm with you. I think that life, my basic metaphysical proposal is that life is mystery. So I'm with you. So let's take a different example. It's the same example, same kind of example, but think of the following: your wife says something, or you're talking with her, and she tells you that when she was 8 years old, this happened, and you think, I had no idea that when she was 8 years old that happened, and it feels out of character or something like that. This is not consistent with what you know about her. But you love her all the more, and you love her all the more when this happens. You think, and then of course it comes to mind, well, what other things do I not know about her?
Yes.
And that's the perfume of mystery is not inconsistent with love. Quite the contrary. I think mystery is very consistent with loving her, for sure. Yes. In fact, it seems to me that to the extent that one believes that one can know one's significant other to the final degree, to that extent, there's something that has ceased to ripen or starts to become a desiccant.
Yes, it is totally fixed and not going to develop anymore. It's like the end of the road. Now we can take a photo, and then we will be those people in the photo from this point on.
Yeah.
But no, that's not. But I'm really interested in knowing more about what you mean by mystery and where it comes from, and whether it is, and why is it that many times, like I can talk about my own perspective. Many times I can't find it in other areas of my life. Where is it? How is it that in some places it is found easily? And how is it that we dismiss it sometimes, or we find alternative ways of talking about something that is mysterious? And why is it that sometimes we just don't see it?
Wow.
While I give you some time to think out another example, I was discussing in preparation for our conversation, I was discussing spirituality with my wife.
Oh, cool.
And I said, what do you think about it? And one of the examples that she told me was example of an analogy with intelligence. And she said, you see, everybody has intelligence, and to various degrees. We can imagine the metaphor of something quantifiable. It is a metaphorical way of treating it.
Yeah.
But when we are dealing with somebody who presumably has low level of intelligence, that doesn't appear to us as something that is low in quantity. It appears to us as absent. Low intelligence appears as an absence of something, an absence of intelligence. On the other hand, high intelligence presents itself as a presence, as something that is positively exists, something that is added to the situation. So that, and in that way, she also was arguing that spirituality is also like that. It is, when it is, in some people have a reduced sense of spirituality, and we see it as absence. We see it as a lack, but it doesn't mean that it's not there. Maybe something like that can apply to mystery too.
Oh, you've been thinking about this a bit. So what are your first thoughts about it? Either spirituality or mystery or both?
For me, they are more of the kind of questions that come to my mind. They are not statements. We can ask, for example, whether spirituality is something that is part of everything, is a thing, is an aspect. If I can find the spiritual side of every object or every person, every situation, is it part of things like a property, or is it a style? Is it a way that I can apply in the way I deal with things, in the way I approach things? Is it like a strategy that we apply? Not something that we find, but something that we learn and then we do.
Those are good. I tend to think of, let's start with mystery. I like the Tao Te Ching. It opens the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. Right. Or the Tao that can be Tao is not the eternal Tao in some translations. There are many translations. So,
but I think about that a lot. If you don't mind a playful question, the moment I read that statement, the Tao that can be said is not the Tao, I'll say, okay, just tell me one of the Taos that was a Tao before, and then it expired. So at least give me an example, something to work with. Give me one of the Taos that was almost a Tao, but then it was said, but then it was not. It's almost too difficult. It almost makes it inaccessible.
Almost, but okay. Let's just try a different approach. So I think this will bring us to mystery. Okay, so suppose people were to, let's say you and I, we're going to sit and meditate.
Okay.
So what typically happens is that, given that we both have intellectual backgrounds, the thinking will come and keep coming as a stream of sorts, or various streams initially. Okay, so we're involved in some kind of meditation, and perhaps we're letting go thoughts. And so our being is really quieting down and becoming more restful. Usually the second step for people who are more intellectual is that we start to discover their feelings. Agitation or anger or just sadness, melancholy or whatever. So it's, I call it more of a perturbation or agitation. They don't always seem like feelings, they're contractions. So we start to see that those are the case. So they're, as it were, deeper than our ordinary thoughts. And then let's suppose that it's really outside of time, but we keep meditating. And somehow it's the case that there's an even greater quietness, and we call it establishing ourselves or settling. Then usually what happens is that there's a bursting open, at least for me, there's a bursting open of the sense doors. The birds seem louder, right? It's not that hard to imagine or conceive of, right? You just imagine thoughts are turned off, imagine feelings are turned off. Then there's just the sensorium is amplified. So the bird song can be the case. Things feel very tactile. Or there might be a movement towards sensations. So maybe there's a pain in the lower back or something like that. Less dramatic. But what if those are then quieted down? It's okay if they're still there, but what if there's a waning of our attention? Our attention is always directed at something. Right? Attention is an intentional in the phenomenological sense. It's intentional. It's so an intention to think, an intent to emote or intent to feel or to sense or whatever. What if those are all quieted down? Most of us don't have experiences with that. But just consider that we no longer can avail ourselves. Let's just say the thoughts have subsided, feelings have subsided, our sense perceptions, touching, tasting, smelling, seeing, and so forth, have all subsided, and our sensations have subsided. Now, that's really interesting, but because there could still be something like a non-objective awareness without objects, without intentional objects. Well, now we're getting closer to the Tao. That cannot be said, touched, tasted, sensed, felt, and that to me is mystery, or at least that's the beginning of mystery. There is existence or being that can't be in any way conceptually or sensorially draped in ordinary understandings, but it is. I mean, if one actually does those kinds of meditations, it gets one closer to what enlightenment is. Enlightenment is it can be the full experience of being, aware being, luminous being, without yet intentional objects. Now, the intentional objects do arise. There's nothing wrong with intentional objects. This is why the Heart Sutra in Buddhism says, form is emptiness. Form, all concrete particulars we were just talking about, is empty, is the boundless nature of reality in an ultimate sense. But also, emptiness is form. Emptiness is, as Tao Te Ching says, manifests itself in the 10,000 things. There's plenitude. There's a generosity. So that's a reply. To be clear, just to be clear about what I'm trying to say in words, it's a non-experienced experience of aware being. It is undeniably not nothing. It's also not something.
Right.
I.e., it's not something. It's not a thing. It is genuine presence. Zen would say a one without a second, oneness without a second, one without two. There's yet to be a two, yet to be any splitting, any dualism. And epiphenomenally, or maybe even intrinsically, it's peaceful in a way that's hard to put into words as well. So I think that's what the Tao Te Ching is a mystical text. It's a text for meditators. It's also a political treatise, to be short. But the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. It's saying that anything you can put into words is not it, because it's not an it. And usually in non-dual circles, they'll speak about it's like the ocean, or it's like water before there are waves. Or it's like the ground, or as my Zen teacher was saying the other day during a one-on-one, it's always already underfoot. It's so simple, so clear from this point of view, but at the same time, always missed for most people. It's always that which is neglected, overlooked, passed over. So that for me, that in short is mystery. It is, but it cannot be comprehended. And it's okay, and it's more than okay. It is, but it cannot be comprehended by the finite mind. So there's what one teacher calls a perfume. There's a perfume of being, or sweetness.
Right. So my understanding was initially, I thought that mystery, what is mysterious, is actually floating above, and then I ground it with thoughts and perceptions and sensations. But actually, now that I listen to your description, I realize that you are talking about the bedrock. You're talking about the bedrock is mystery. The bedrock is what is always there, And then we can lift ourselves up with sensations, feelings, and thoughts. And the more we go in the direction of thoughts, the more we are actually floating and distancing ourselves.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I
Mm.
think that's right. So I think you asked yourself, how do we, or you asked before, how do we come into contact with mystery, or why there's sometimes what's more. My answer, I use the very simple phenomenological account. The simple phenomenological account says that if you just think of ordinary experience, you have thoughts of all sorts, memories, anticipations, goals. All that is called thought or thinking. Feelings of all sorts. I'm using this very widely. Sensations, such as what we call pain, physical pain, or tickles or crackles when you're paying attention to the sensations, and sense perceptions of all sorts. If you think that it's our ordinary experience, and I think it's a pretty accurate description, and then you just concatenate them in various ways and iterate them and say, oh, it moves from thought to feeling and so forth. And you just ask yourself, is there any being without those? The answer turns out to be yes, but most people think this is the woo part, right? Because they haven't necessarily given themselves over to that kind of inquiry. It seems non-comprehensible that there could still be being without thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. But I would submit that the tables need to be turned on them, because that skepticism they have, I think, is owing to misunderstanding. There are times in their lives, in our lives, when that has occurred. If only what we'd say briefly after the fact, when the mind comes back online and says, oh, that was an interesting moment that occurred. The mind is a temporal device. It understands things in terms of spatio-temporal categories. So post facto, it comes back and says, oh, that happened there was really interesting. But there are these ruptures, right? These unaccounted for ruptures or events. And hopefully it doesn't sound too grandiose. It could just be, oh, I lost myself in that, which is not quite an accurate description. I was, or we made love, or it was a beautiful sunset, or something. They can be ordinary in nature, but they are mysterious. It's just after the fact we code them in a way that helps us to improperly make sense of them. We don't realize that they're mystical signs. I'll try to give an example here that brings us closer to home. The first time I meditated was back in 2012. My wife and I were then living in New York City, and we held hands and we closed our eyes and meditated. And I say held hands, I'm trying to reveal how inexperienced we were. Because usually when you meditate, you don't hold hands as if we're kumbaya. It was lovely and charming, but and we closed our eyes. And there were no instructions or directions, and so it must have probably just been the mind doing whatever it is that it ordinarily does. Open our eyes after what we call 15 minutes or so. We walk downstairs. We walk outside. We're living very close to Central Park at the time, where I was. We cross the threshold into Central Park, and everything changes. It was an experience of what Plato might call beauty itself. Everything was beautiful and wonderful. And I don't mean it was a different world. I don't mean we were, as it were, different people. The sense of a separate self was dialed way down. We could barely keep our eyes open because things were so magnificent and wonderful. There was no judgment, no doubt, no comparisons. This is better than that, or this and that, and so forth. Everything was as it should be. And nothing was amiss. Nothing was out of place. Nothing could be out of place. This occurred for 2 or 3, what will later on look like 2 or 3 hours, but what I'm describing was properly understood, timeless, I would say. And this is just a whiff of mystery, and I would say it's a whiff of our hint of our true being. I don't think our true being is such as to be beset by all the tightnesses and contractions and pains and struggles that we constantly go through and that are very well described by countless novels. What occurred to me then, as it still occurs to me now, is that this is not something I hold on to as being special. It wasn't special. If anything, it was not special at all. It was clearly our birthright. It seemed so abundantly clear to me then as now that, oh, of course. Of course it's possible to actually be in the world in such a way as to not be bedraggled by our ordinary cares, concerns, and problems in a way that we've gotten so accustomed to. So the absence there was the absence of thought, the absence of ordinary feeling, it was the absence of the things that I had taken to be myself. And therefore there was the presence of everything that I had forgotten. The ground had revealed itself, which is saying, hello, I've been here all along. You forgot me.
Right. So maybe even that label of mystery, by the way, I finally understand why this ground level is associated with abundance.
Yeah.
I get that point, why it makes sense to, because it's in the medium of thought that we run after things that we lack, we don't have. But I wonder, maybe it is that label mystery is also a way, a perspective that is being grasped from within that medium of thought, thinking, where it is that doesn't make sense. It's radically different.
Yeah, it's a pointer for sure, as we would say in these spiritual circles. You wouldn't call it mystery when you just are the ground of being. You wouldn't call it anything. In fact, you wouldn't think to call it anything, nor would you need to. It's just a term we use. A lot of these Eastern traditions have what are called pointers or teachings. And they're teachings that are available to people who are at a certain point in their understanding, and that would be true of me too. So when the teachers speak to me, they're trying to get me to see what I keep overlooking. So they need to use language, and not in a denotative sense, but in a performative sense. They're trying to get me to move somewhere. So mystery is a pointer. Ontological rock bottom, if this view is anything like true, the ocean isn't mysterious to itself. In fact, it doesn't even know itself as ocean. It just is. Nisargadatta once said, Nisargadatta was a kind of Eastern sage or an Indian guru, and he once said, I'm paraphrasing, for those who have realized their true nature, they may not even know it. There's a sense of there's no reflective distance one can take.
Yeah, it reminds me of labels like esoteric or exotic. Like when I was moving to Macau, people were saying, "Oh, that sounds like a very exotic place," but nobody who lives in Macau will describe Macau as exotic or esoteric.
Right.
Is that the mystery is from the pointer that functions from a particular standpoint that is outside. But once we enter into our hometown or our place of origin, then it doesn't make sense to talk about it as an exotic place or as a foreign place, or as an unusual place.
Right. Yeah, and the ultimate experience would be that life is home. Life is mystery is a gift to give into the finite mind to allow it to begin its inquiry. Oh, what does it mean that life is mystery? But ultimately, life is home.
So mystery is a portal.
Yeah, exactly. Mystery is a portal. Yeah.
So how? That's great. That was a very loose, clear, and helpful description.
Yeah.
Now, I would like, if it is not too much to ask, I would like to. I'd like it to. No, not too much to ask. I'd like to try to relate it to those three things that you said: enlightenment, wisdom, and love.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And are they three different kinds of mystery? Because when you were describing this sense of being at the ground, being connected to a sense of nothing is amiss. I remember two types of experiences. One type is the experience of being really sick and then recovering.
Oh, yeah.
After a recovery, when I regain my health, everything suddenly is perfect. Like I imagined the sensation of my face against the pillow. That's just a gift. That's such a something to enjoy and celebrate. Before it goes away, it all goes away, and I adjust to it all over again. So that's the recovery or returning to from sickness. The other one is love, intimacy. That's also a portal for me to when I'm with someone I love and I feel loved by them. Then it is not just that everything else is the same. We are just together, and everything else is like the park you talked about. Everything else is not the same anymore.
Yeah.
We're transported.
Exactly. Yeah. They're right. They're both transporting. Both regaining health and the genuine experience of love is transporting. Of course, we're using it as a metaphor. It doesn't take you anywhere, but it feels as though it does.
Right, right.
Yeah,
So
it takes you to here, as it were.
Exactly.
So, shortest or longest road to here. You're genuinely here.
Right. Or you realize that you have been here.
Yeah.
So love is, I think, I relate to it, but the wisdom and enlightenment part, is it fair to see them as also portals, as different ways to that mystery takes form, and then they all lead to the same place? Or
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. I hope so. Let's hope so.
Right.
Well, I have a way of talking about. Let's talk about wisdom.
Okay.
So I think that I have a view of wisdom might be a little bit different from these Eastern traditions. A lot of them speak about wisdom as if it were knowledge itself or a certain kind of knowledge. I don't think that's quite right, though I think it's hinting at something. So I think when we first think about wise people, I think we begin by looking at their conduct. If you think the Dalai Lama is wise, you might be going to him for advice. We think of wisdom as coming out in these wise sayings initially. Be just, be kind, or whatever.
Quotable statements.
Yeah, it's yes. I'm just beginning with a very simple analysis of where we start when it comes to the nature of wisdom. I think we do start with wise sayings from wise people. So my basic idea is that you start with conduct. Someone is wise in virtue of the way that he or she conducts him or herself. But that wouldn't be sufficient, because if it were the case that someone were compassionate, we wouldn't call that person yet wise, we'd call that person compassionate. If someone were courageous, let's say a warrior, we wouldn't yet call that person wise, we'd call that person brave, and so on and so forth. So wisdom becomes the meta virtue of virtues, the meta virtue of conduct. And if we ask ourselves, well, what is that upon which our conduct rests? I tend to use the word understanding, or it could be knowledge. So my definition is the following: wisdom just is right or virtuous conduct flowing directly from right understanding. The proposal, once again, is wisdom is right conduct flowing directly from right understanding.
And then that way of formulating it makes it relatable. It relates it to that connection to the ground, because it is
exactly it's the understanding of being. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so wisdom. This is the reason I find this to be helpful, is it links metaphysics with conduct in some way. It links your understanding of the nature of reality to how you conduct yourself. I think that's important in ways that analytic philosophers probably wouldn't, because I think that our conduct needs something from which it comes. In other words, why be compassionate, for example, or why be kind?
Mm-hmm.
From a secular point of view, it seems as though you get some pretty flat answers, because because it could be instrumentally good to be kind to other people, or maybe there's some kind of naturalistic explanation according to which it's good to be kind because it helps for social animals to cooperate.
Mm.
I find these to be very thin, though. The thicker answer is you're kind. Kindness is an expression, perhaps here and now, of wisdom, which is itself grounded in the understanding of what all this is about and how all this is interconnected.
Mm.
To me, that's a much thicker, and satisfying explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Why be wise? Well, wise is the virtue. Wise is the meta virtue, the way of discerning what the right thing to do in this context is, and it's based on a deep understanding of the totality of being.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the standard for wisdom is extraordinarily high. This is why Socrates didn't say that he was wise. He was a philosopher. He was a seeker of wisdom. He was, you know this, I'm sure you know this, but he didn't say he was wise. He just said he was wiser than other people, all of whom took themselves to be wise and knowledgeable.
Right.
So there's a kind of fallibility or humility. But so that would be how I think that the enlightenment is the understanding of our being, the direct understanding of our being. Wisdom is the conduct that flows from this direct understanding, and love is the fundamental. It's kind of love is the fundamental affective dimension. It's the intimacy of being, the sweetness of being. And it's what makes us cry when we hear certain things, or it gives it. I can only say it gives things a kind of intimacy that they don't otherwise have. It's also a course correction for these kind of jnana accounts that are overly knowledgeable. I mean, there are different paths in Eastern traditions, such as bhakti yoga, which is a path of devotion, or love, with faith. And there's a jnana path, which is a path of knowledge. But but ultimately they're said to be the same. And I think we need to be able to, in somewhat Ken Wilberian terms, be able to express ourselves both in the sense of wisdom and in the sense of love. There should be the possibility of crying when that's the meet thing to do. And it's not that you cogitated and you thought, what should I do here? Should I cry? And then you just cried. Wow, this is so moving. I am moved to tears. Or I love her so much, and that's all there is. I love people so much, or I love animals so much. But it's coming from this non-dual point of view. It's coming from the ground of being. It's coming from that deep, deep, deep intuitive understanding of the fundamental, boundless, interconnected nature of reality.
That description is very salient to me. When you said it's rich, and you said there's thickness to wisdom, and which means that somebody who is wise doesn't take a phenomenon or something like catching a cold or falling in love. It doesn't take, that person wouldn't take those to be corresponding only to one sign, only to one symptom. So a wise person is less likely to be tricked. It's harder to trick a wise person because they will look for more signs, look for signs at different layers, different time scales.
Right.
And I think that sensation of crying for me always is associated with a kind of discrepancy. So a person who is experiencing love, but also at the same time experiencing that, oh, I will never be able to express this in a way that fully satisfies me. And that discrepancy, like being aware of multiple multiple different layers and the different things that happen together, but they all coexist.
Mm.
And the response to it is like kind of a surrender to that. There's nothing I can do with all these coexistences.
Yeah.
And then I'll start crying.
Well, love is, I think love at bottom is surrender. Wisdom at bottom is this wisdom at bottom is this kind of all things accounted for conduct. It's clear that being compassionate is the thing to do here. It doesn't always have to be highly analytical, but there's a corralling of all the forces so that it's the direction, the action is clear. Or think about someone you know who's just really good at being patient. I think patience is not the same as forbearance. This person is able to just, but we should almost say patience is a kind of sitting there and rest. Things are okay as they are. I can listen to you as, I don't even think I can listen to you as long as I need to. I just listen to you as long as is needed. So everything, all the energies are kind of corralled so that patience is what is manifesting here, for example. And enlightenment is obviously the hardest one to speak about, but it's just not, to me, it's not even remotely implausible that people have understood something some people have understood something about the nature of reality so very deeply that it has altered or shifted or flipped fundamentally their perspective on what this is all about. The fact that we've met such people, I think, once in a while, and we think, what was it about that person? There's something about that person that seemed very different from what I'm accustomed to, that might lead us to think that something's happened over there. Yeah.
And it's quite strange that there's this familiarity with it that we have. I remember as a child, I met people who had that shift in perspective that was so different, and I had a sense of kinship with them. That like if they just keep telling me, if I can just get more of an access to their experience, or if I listen to them more, I can also grasp it. And there was not a sense of like alienation or distance, or like, oh, where is that coming from? It made sense, or at least it would begin to make sense. There was a path of exploration that I could engage with. I'm reading finally the Brothers Karamazov.
Oh, great! I have yet to finally read it, but it's been recommended multiple times. So tell me about it.
There's a character that just jumped to my mind. He's an elder. He's an elder in the monastery. His name is Father Zosima. So I wouldn't say anymore. I have this sense of like, wow, how strange, how rare, but also maybe paradoxically, how familiar, how familiar despite its rarity,
right,
and strangeness.
That's right, because there's something really quite wonderful and beautiful about being in the presence of certain people. And I think you're right. It's on this understanding, it's not that this person is different from us, it's that there is something, we recognize that person, roughly speaking, because we recognize ourself. We recognize something about ourself that is starting to shine forth a bit. I mean, here's ordinarily when it's said about enlightenment or self-realization or some such. The ordinary thought is that this is difficult, arduous, is redundant, but arduous and exceptional, and only a rare breed does it. That's one kind of standard way of thinking about it. But the paradox, as you nicely pointed out, is that when you're around people and I'm not suggesting it would be another discussion to talk about where their shadows and where their blind spots are and such. That's another conversation. We're just imagining a kind of idealized version or ideal type of enlightenment here, which would need to be made more sophisticated in time. But when we're with someone like that, there's an interesting power and presence that we share with them. We know that we're in the presence of something really quite beautiful and, as you rightly said, familiar. It is so home-like. Of course, it's as if we'd forgotten something. We now remember something very important. Not something, but it's as if we've. Oh yes, I've come back to remembering something that has been overlooked time and again.
Right.